Welcome to Ancient Awakening with Castalia. For those of you who don't know me, I am Castalia and I am the host of this podcast. I do work over at the Realm of Inspiration and at elfianrealm.com to help inspire the collective all in their ascension journey. I work to help guide and heal through my channeled readings and coaching sessions. I am a certified card reader, channeler, crystal Reiki master, and certified in ancient Greek gods and goddesses and Greek mythology. So what better way to combine both of my passions than to uncover the spiritual metaphors hidden in myths, Greek myths to be exact. The teachings and guidelines already have been there before us, just hidden beneath the surface of stories full of tragedy, heartbreak, war, death, love, and more. The time for metaphors is done. So let's find clarity together through a transformative journey that is Ancient Awakening. In the ancient city of Eleusis, just outside Athens, a secret rite was performed nearly 2,000 years ago by people from all walks of life from all over the country. The Eleusinian Mysteries were not just ceremonies, they were soul initiations, rooted in the myth of Demeter and Persephone. They offered a glimpse into the mystery of death, the promise of rebirth, and the transformation of the human spirit. In this week's episode, in episode number 7, we walk the path of Eleusis, from descent to ascent, from grief to grace. This is the Eleusinian Mysteries, death, rebirth, and the soul's sacred journey. But before we fully dive into this week's episode, let's review the journal prompts from last week's episode, where I'll give a short summary of my response to these prompts, and we can have the foundation for discourse and discussion in the comment section to further our development journey together. So, the first prompt from last week's episode is, when do I feel the most like Eleusis? Bold, expressive, and seen. So last week we discussed the myth of Eleusis and Selene, their myths, and the symbolism of the creator and creative archetypes. So Eleusis is the creator energy, the manifestor energy. So when do I feel the most like Eleusis? I feel like the most like Eleusis when I do podcasts like this, when I'm in my creating something that where I dive into the metaphors of things like logic and studying and uncovering and understanding things and bringing the truth to light. So the second prompt is, when do I feel most like Selene? Quiet, intuitive, hidden, the creative archetype, the healer. And I feel the most like Selene when I do channelings and when I am working with clients and I'm doing card readings and I'm tapping into my intuition and I am doing basically everything that I do over at the Realm of Inspiration. So for me, another big reason why I created this, second channel, created this podcast forum is to have my divine masculine side have something to get excited about, to work on, to create, and also together is the manifestation of higher understanding and uncovering the things that have been hidden in the fog, bringing clarity to things is so important. And I think the hidden aspect of Selene, I do feel that way when I don't always express who I am and what I do in regards to spirituality, but I feel the most seen when I am able to do that. So that those two questions can be answered in conjunction. Number 3 was, do I fear the spotlight of creation or the silence of gestation more, and why? For me, it's the silence of gestation. I do prefer the spotlight of creation, although sometimes I can feel overwhelmed by it. The silence of going through phases, of going through that part, for the longest time is something that I was scared of. And even just sitting in silence, I like to be doing things. When I was in my spiritual hermit period of time, my spiritual hermit era, I wasn't in silence. I was connecting. I was connecting to God, connecting to source, creator, higher beings, my angels, my spirit team. I was meditating. I was doing card readings. I was doing journalings. I was healing. I was clearing out clutter. I was learning energy cleansing. I was actively doing things all the time. I wasn't sitting still and doing nothing. And that sitting still and doing nothing and just allowing things to process, that's something that, not necessarily a fear, but something that I struggle with. Like, even at the beach, I can't just like lay down and do nothing. Like, I gotta go for a walk. Like, if I'm gonna get a tan, I'm gonna go for a walk. Or I need to be reading a book, or, you know, doing something. And I have to challenge myself all the time to just sit and allow the silence. And I've started to do this when I go on the bus, and I've tried to do it when I tried to go on like quiet walks, and like not even meditate, because focusing on meditating as well is like me not allowing myself to sit in silence. So just actually actively sitting in the silence, and that brings me present moment awareness, but it's a struggle. I mean, for a while I couldn't meditate because I couldn't like handle that sitting. Now I can meditate, but then I'm not allowing myself to sit in silence now. So I have to find the balance of all of those things. So it's important to have the balance of both. Prompt 4, what does my creative rhythm look like, and where is it out of balance? This is a very hard question to answer, because my creative rhythm comes forth, like, I actively try to do things where I am balancing my creator and my creative energy. So when I do this podcast, like, I'm using my creative energy when I'm making the thumbnails, or I'm making the like slides that I throw in, or when I'm video editing, I'm like, ooh, what can I do here? What can I add here? How can I fix this? When I am doing like photography and things, I'm allowing my creative energy. This looks like a good angle. I'm allowing inspiration to flow, but I always turn it into creation. For me, my creativity turns into creation, and my creations turn into creativity, and I have creation and creativity in one together, and I've learned that balance. I know that when I was younger, I didn't have that balance, and I honestly don't know how to get back into the state where I don't have that balance. Sometimes I do go longer periods of time without embracing the creative side. Like, I can go a little bit of longer periods of time, but I bring it back with music. I bring it back with like doing dance workouts or something. Like, I bring it back in some way, or just doodling or doing something. I think brainstorming is a very creative process, and I use that to help me create. So I don't know. My creative rhythm, it's very random. It's when inspiration flows. Number 5, if I could speak to Eleus and Selene, what would they teach me about my soul's experience? So I thought this, like, if I were to talk to the sun and the moon, if I were to talk to the sun would tell me. And I recently did that, and I recently sat in the sun for a little while, and just tried to connect. And my soul's expression comes through when I am sharing things with others, when I'm communicating about things that, you know, spark a fire in my soul. My soul's expression is following the flow of inspiration within me. And from Selene, from the moon, following my intuition, following my guidance system, and creating sacred spaces in my environment. So making sure that I am maintaining a sacred space. My soul feels on fire there. My soul feels on fire when I communicate, the metaphors and the myths, or when I share facts like of history or animals, like animal conservation in general. My soul expresses itself by bringing a voice to things that don't have a voice, by expressing the truth and knowledge of things that are not able to do so for themselves. That would actually be the best way to answer that. That brings, that sparks a fire in my soul. So that being said, sparking a fire in your soul, this week's episode is the Eleusinian Mysteries that took place in Eleusina, and these mysteries, I have always been fascinated with the myth of Persephone in general, And this isn't an episode where it is the myth of Persephone or the myths of Demeter or anything like that. This is more historical based, but there is myth rooted in the history. So basically, the myth of Demeter and Persephone is, in summary, because I'm going to do a full multiple things with the myths of Persephone and Demeter and Hades, just short summary. Persephone was abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld. Demeter is the goddess of harvest. She very much is metaphorical of Mother Nature, and she mourns the loss of her daughter, which causes a famine. And when Persephone returns, she, due to what occurred in the underworld, she did eat some of the fruit of the dead, so she has to spend half of the year below, symbolizing seasonal cycles. So it's half of the year isn't in bloom, and the other half is. So the fall is when Persephone is going to the underworld. So that's the mourning period of her going to the underworld, the letting her go to the underworld. The winter season is her being in the underworld. The spring season is her returning, and the summer season is when she is in the land of the living. So in a sense, it is technically, because in some interpretations of the myth, it's like she ate 6, so she does have to spend half of the year, and that like period of time of preparing for her to return is the spring, and accepting the fact that she is leaving and preparing for her leaving is the fall. But basically, it's the myth that explains the seasons. The myth forms the spiritual backbone of the mysteries as well. So the descent, the loss, the search, intuition, and the ascent, rebirth. So they believed in ancient Greece that this myth, this story, was a great symbolism of rebirth. So there are 3 phases: purification, initiation, and revelation when it comes to the mysteries and what occurred. So the purification is the lesser mysteries, the preparation of the soul, cleansing, fasting, and intention. The initiation is the greater mysteries, the sacred rites, symbolic death and rebirth, which is held in autumn. So when this video comes out, it is autumn, so happy autumn. Revelation is the third. So this is the final vision. The soul sees the mystery of life and death, and the name of this can be called EP7. Initiates were sworn to secrecy, but many claimed to lose their fear of death after the rites. This is very interesting because in spiritual awakening in general, you do lose a fear of death. When you understand that death isn't the end, you're not afraid of death. So the spiritual implications of the mysteries, there were 3 spiritual implications that I was able to uncover when studying the mysteries, when in general studying Greek history. So death is transformation. The descent into the underworld mirrors the soul's journey into the shadow, and Persephone's return symbolizes the resurrection of consciousness. So this is a concept that, even though the mysteries, there isn't much known about it, this concept was true, that they, death as transformation, the rebirth. So to be initiated was to die before dying and awaken beyond fear. And we kind of talked about this in the Cerberus episode 5, where we were talking about Cerberus. This came up. So the second thing was grief as a sacred catalyst. This is something that I have observed in my personal life. My mother went through her awakening due to grief, and so did I. And through grieving the loss of a loved one, and then you go through the grieving process of grieving who you were before. So I watched how the grieving process was the catalyst in my mother becoming a better version of herself. And I went through that process as well, grieving kind of who she was before she went through grief, like that change in my life, and grieving the loss of, people around me and my paternal family that's now estranged. I went through that. And that whole grieving process of grieving everything was the catalyst to me awakening, to me sitting in this stool talking about this, and to me even going back and re-studying myth to the part that I can actually sit and talk about these from a place of a little bit more intellectual authority. Like I have a higher understanding of these things than I did before, and that's the grief of who I was before being that catalyst. And so grief it's not just because Demeter goes through the grief every time. That's what the myth is, symbolic of. If she goes through the grief every time Persephone goes to the underworld. So every time Persephone changes, every time there is change, Demeter is in mourning. There is grief more than how it's related to death. Demeter's mourning halts the world. Grief becomes a portal to divine change. When you are in grief, so much change. I have examples in my real life, examples in myth. When there is grieving, there is divine change. The mysteries teach that sorrow is not weakness, but initiation. Grief is the goddess's cry, and the soul's call to evolve. So the grief of Demeter inspired, the mysteries as well as the rebirth of Persephone. But the grief doesn't allow you to recognize the rebirth. You have to go through grief as well to overcome the fear of death. So the third thing was the rebirth of soul awakening. So the return of Persephone brings spring. The soul blooms after descent. Initiates believed that they were spiritually reborn and promised a better afterlife. I kind of want to talk about this. So with the awakening journey, you actually, in a sense, are promised a better afterlife. When you are aware of your impact as a soul and of your karmic balance, you can actually work to clear your karma so that you can start to live a better life in the physical. And when you transition out of the physical, you can have a better plan for reincarnation. You can have a better after this life. You can have a better time processing. And I feel like I probably mentioned this more over on the realm of inspiration, but when I've connected with mediums and when I've connected with the veil line, the common message coming through is when you die, you are faced, and this is also scientifically, I believe, also proven that it's like the 7 minutes, you get it's like a 7-minute recap of your entire life, and we're living in our 7 minutes right now. Let's have something that's gonna be rememberable for us when we're at that point in time. This fact where we are reliving our life, but for us to understand the lessons, for us to understand in general our soul's journey, we are faced with also our worst actions and how that hurt others, that pain you feel. You will feel the pain of all the pain you caused others times 10. Your soul will feel it when you are able to actually, without the physical form, understand the implications of your actions, and those who hurt you the same would happen. But if you're working and you understand and you seek forgiveness and you forgive yourself and you understand the damage that you caused and you heal and you seek to help others, then you won't feel that pain. You feel that pain if you felt by your dying breath no remorse for your negative actions. That's the only way you would feel that pain. So a promise of a better afterlife is the promise that you taking accountability and healing and integrating and becoming a better person, integrating with your highest self, means you will not be feeling the pain that you caused to others, that times 10 no remorse pain. Until you feel remorse, you will feel that pain. Until you seek forgiveness, you will feel that pain. So that could very well be true. So this is actually factually what ancient Greeks experienced in the mysteries. In current awakening process, this similar concept is happening. The seed must be buried to grow. So must the soul. The soul must dig through the dirt and figure out what's going on to rise up and shine in the sun. And it takes time, because it's not like overnight you just be like, I want to seek forgiveness for all the bad things that I did. No, you have to feel it. And if you choose to experience it while you are living on earth, then your afterlife is easier. And while it is a mystery what occurred, I would venture to guess that some of the things that they were experiencing is going through understanding the actual implications and consequences of their negative actions, truly feeling remorse and seeking forgiveness so that they understand, and so for they would know that they would have a better afterlife. If it is true that these are all metaphors, yes, it was also an actual religion in ancient times, but also, could it be possible that they knew these were metaphors? And they were using them to help make sense of the same type of spiritual awakening things we are experiencing now, except now we have more resources and more evolution as humanity to not have to use metaphors and archetypes to make sense of things in the same way that they did by having a whole pantheon of gods. Something to think about. So that being said, I want to talk about the lesser mysteries and then the greater mysteries. Give an actual deep dive into that, and then there are some other things that these mysteries bring. So first is the lesser mysteries. Purification before revelation. So they were held in Agriaia, near the banks of the Eleusian River in Athens. The lesser mysteries took place in the months of February to March. These rites were not open to all, only those who had been deemed ready to begin the path of initiation. The ritual purification, cleansing of the soul, initiates bathed in the Eleusian River, symbolizing the washing away of spiritual impurities. Now this is where the more pagan aspect of things come in. So obviously there was some spiritual awakening occurring, but I would say humans have evolved since the ancient times. There was also a lack of understanding and why we are as humans karmically paying the price, and a big part of current spiritual awakening is healing our relationship with the animal kingdom. This is why. Because part of the lesser mysteries was sacrifices. Often piglets were sacrificed, offered to Demeter, symbolic of fertility and renewal. So what is noted in history is that they did sacrifice pigs to Demeter as symbolic fertility and renewal. Sacrifices are all over ancient history from all different cultures. Now, if we pretend that this is something that didn't actually really happen, symbolically, I mean, yes, pigs can symbolize fertility and renewal, but also the sacrificing of gluttony as well, because they, from a lower perspective aspect, are symbolize gluttony. Now, those did factually happen. That needs to be said, and that is why we are fixing our relationship with the animal kingdom. What doesn't make sense to me is that, and I guess maybe it's a plot hole in history, but if they believed that Demeter was the goddess of harvest and the way that they treat her is as if she is Mother Nature, why would Mother Nature want you to sacrifice an animal? But it's also interesting that it is specifically pigs, because in other religions that started to form after this point in history, also kind of like there is, oh, the pigs are unclean. See, the pigs here are being used as a symbol of fertility and renewal, but also just being sacrificed like they don't mean anything. There is something there with the symbolism with the pigs and what is considered this, what, I mean, not to eat the pigs. There should be something not to just sacrifice them for nothing, obviously. But I also find it interesting that they're symbolizing fertility when now the animal that would most likely symbolize fertility are the rabbits, actually. So moving forward from that point, this wasn't just physical cleansing, it was a ritual of release, shedding the burdens of ego, guilt, and worldly distractions. I believe, this is not what's factually in history, but I believe that the pigs were not being sacrificed for fertility and renewal just because everything else we know, also part of the physical cleansing of shedding the ego, guilt, and worldly distractions, were they doing that as symbolically of removing something from themselves? Maybe. There is no excuse for sacrificing baby animals. None at all. Absolutely none. Even if they have a group soul and whatever, they still feel pain. Animal welfare, we didn't know much about them in ancient times. Really nothing about animal welfare in ancient times. Can you tell? I do think so. I care about the animals. No excuse for that. But they did it. And you know what we can do? We can move forward and understand it was a very different time back then. So before the soul can descend, it must be emptied. The lesser mysteries were the soul's first breath of sacred air. Wish they could have done that without sacrificing animals. I have to get off that point because there is more to talk about with this, and not the point of this episode at all. Myth reenactments. So the myth of Hercules is often linked to the lesser mysteries. Before his descent into the underworld, he had to undergo purification. His journey became a template for initiates. Strength alone is not enough. The soul must be ritually prepared. Even the strongest must kneel before the mystery. Hercules teaches that power must be purified before it becomes sacred. So, instructions and preparation, the inner curriculum. Initiates receive symbolic teachings, possibly through creative storytelling, like drama, storytelling, sacred objects, through the creation, the divine feminine energy. So first you must, be in your divine masculine energy enough to know that the strongest must kneel to purification. So that is in your divine masculine energy, logically, mentally knowing when it is the right time to, allow yourself to shed that what doesn't serve you. And then stepping into the divine feminine, using creativity to guide you. These teachings were introductory, meant to awaken curiosity, inspire, and reverence within, not to reveal the full mystery. The focus was on alignment, not enlightenment yet. And that's true, you have to go through alignment first and not enlightenment before alignment. Yes. So while the sacrifice thing doesn't align with how the spiritual awakening journey or anything works nowadays, everything else kind of does a little bit. So you can see the foundation of awakening to the soul. The lesser mysteries whisper, you are not yet ready to see, but you are ready to begin. So spiritual meaning of the lesser mysteries. So the elements of the lesser mysteries: water used for emotional cleansing and surrender, sacrifice, release of the ego, honoring the divine. For the myth, the archetypal preparation and soul modeling. So using a myth, they used the story of Hercules, who were believing, they were pagan at this time, so they were probably believing he was real, like a real, like there were hero cults around Hercules, and he became part of the pantheon. So they are, but they're kind of using his story as a soul model, as a metaphor for what they are trying to accomplish, which is interesting. Because did they think it was just a metaphorical story, or fully believe that they are following in the footsteps of someone who was alive and went through this experience? That is part of the mystery. That's part of it. That part is unclear. And then the silence, the inner listening, humility before truth. You gotta be humble too. And that is like humble enough to admit, like, I need healing, I need help, I need to begin. Humble enough to begin. The rites were the threshold of transformation. The moment the soul said yes to the journey. That's the first step. And so then we get to the greater mysteries. The soul's descent, revelation, and rebirth. Held in the fall during the month of Bodriomian, which was the ancient term for one of the months. See, I was able to find the ancient term for February to March, Anthesterion, but I wasn't able to find it for the fall month. So what month that is exactly, although if it's February to March, I'm gonna guess, given also like seasonal equinoxes, Probably August to September. If the spring equinox is like mid-March and the autumn equinox is mid-September, I'm gonna assume it's like the 6 months things, and like the modern days, it's like August to September. So basically everything leading up to the autumn equinox and everything leading up to the spring equinox would be my guess on that, because I can't, probably if I spend a little bit more time looking for it, maybe I could find it, but I couldn't find it in this week's preparation. The greater mysteries were the hearts of the Eleusinian rites, a sacred pilgrimage from the known into the unknown. So the lesser rites took place in Athens, and then Eleusina and Athens are relatively close to each other. But I guess back then, yeah, by car, they're relatively close. Back then it was a hike, a trek, a pilgrimage. A sacred pilgrimage from the known into the unknown, from surface life into soul truth. While the lesser mysteries prepared the initiates, the greater mysteries transformed them. So the sacred process, the journey beginning, initiates walked the sacred way from Athens to Eleusina, a 22-kilometer pilgrimage. I've considered, for like the realm of inspiration purposes and also for like the purposes of this podcast, I did consider, because I could very easily go do it, go and do the pilgrimage, maybe by car, not by foot, but maybe by foot, to have like that video content and to have to maybe even do the podcast in that format. I thought about that, but currently when I'm recording this, it is still very hot, even though technically the time I'm recording this would probably have been the time that they were doing this mystery. But right now we're experiencing global warming, so September in Greece feels just as hot as August. So it's definitely, I will probably in the future do that, and I might do a special episode when I go to Eleusina as a little bit of a callback to this. But at some point I would be interested to do this, to see if there's even like, there has to be an ancient trail left behind, because in Delphi I have found ancient trails, and in other like areas of Greece I have found ancient trails, ancient paths that are said to be where certain pilgrimages or certain things occurred in myth and also in ancient history. So I would assume that's there. I don't know where it would be, but it would have to be there somewhere. Along the way, they reenacted mythical scenes, sang hymns, and carried sacred objects. So they basically had like a parade procession. I can imagine, that's how I envision it in my mind, is like a theatrical parade. The journey symbolized the soul's movement from ordinary consciousness into sacred awareness. Every step was a shedding, every mile a descent into mystery. So the ritual purification, preparing the vessel, which is you, before entering the initiation hall called the Teleusterion, initiates underwent ritual cleansings. This included bathing, fasting, and possibly ingesting a sacred kykion, a barley-based drink. I'd also like to note that barley, was it last week's episode? I believe so. Last week's episode, Psyche used a barley cake, not last week's episode at all, 2 weeks ago, Cerberus. In the Cerberus episode, Psyche uses barley cakes to put Cerberus to sleep. So also a note there that barley was what we uncovered in episode 5, we uncovered that Cerberus is a metaphor for the human sphere of death. And initiates actually said that they experienced a loss of the fear of death after the mysteries. So barley must have some significance in helping with overcoming fear. So I have studied some herbology things. I have a little manual of it. I haven't practiced understanding the power of herbs and using them for those sorts of purposes. But there has to be something, if in myth and in something physically that they were doing, barley is present. And barley is a powerful herb. Just in general, it has a lot of properties of it that are helpful. But there's gotta be a deeper reason. Barley has made a lot of presence in stories related to the underworld and overcoming fear and death and all of those things, or the fear of death. So purification wasn't just physical, it was energetic, emotional, and spiritual. To receive the mystery, the soul must be emptied of noise. So the descent, entering the darkness. Inside the initiate hall, initiates experience symbolic death. The myth of Persephone's abduction was reenacted, the descent into the underworld. The hall was dark, silent, and sacred. Initiates were blindfolded or led in silence. The soul must descend to remember what it truly is. The revelation, the vision beyond death. At the climax, a sacred vision was revealed, possibly involving light symbols or a dramatic unveiling. Though the details were secret, many initiates, again, claimed to lose their fear of death afterwards. The vision was not intellectual. It was experiential, a direct transmission of divine truth. What they saw could not be spoken. It could only be lived. Everyone's awakening journey is different, and it's hard to explain. The ascent, rebirth, and return. After the vision, initiates emerged transformed. They celebrated with dances, feasts, and offerings. The return to Athens marked the rebirth of the soul, now awakened, initiated, and aligned. They walked back not as mortals, but as souls who had seen the eternal. So the phase of the spiritual meaning in the greater mysteries, the phase is spiritual lesson. The descent, face the shadow, surrender control. The revelation, receive divine truth beyond logic. Maybe they were in those moments able to receive guidance from their higher selves. I find it interesting. Unless I blacked it out while reading it, there was no mention of sacrifices for the greater mysteries. Ascent, integrate the mystery, live awakened. The greater mysteries were not about learning, they were about becoming. So now I want to talk about just a few more things in relation to the mysteries, and then we will close out this episode. So firstly, there are some mythical archetypes that are related to the mysteries that mirror the Eleusinian journey. So as previously mentioned, Hercules' purification before descent is something that they did follow. And they follow doing the process of purification, and it is mentioned Hercules' journey before his final labor. Some other things that mirror that is Orpheus's descent into the underworld for love. A big way to overcome fear of anything is love. And Psyche, that I did mention, her soul trials and rebirth, so she does go through trials as well, and that's like the barley is relevant in the mystery. So the myths, a lot of them carry aspects of what the ancient Greeks were doing in the mysteries that we know of. I think we could probably, if we look at the metaphors of the myths, maybe we could uncover a little bit more about the mysteries. Thinking of these myths widens the lens and shows how the Eleusina is a part of a larger mythical pattern, and the soul's universal rite of passage. The role of silence and secrecy I do want to mention. So the initiates were forbidden to speak of what they saw. This wasn't just secrecy, it was a spiritual commitment. The mysteries were meant to be experienced, not explained. Some truths are too sacred for words. The soul must feel them, not speak them. I also think that probably people weren't ready, and I have a ponder. So hear me out. Think of this with me. What if the mysteries, what happened in the mysteries, are already being told to us through myth? What if the myths were created to explain the mysteries in a way that still is keeping the secrecy, because they were not expressly saying what they experienced, but that there are myths that explain what happened? And what if us uncovering the spiritual metaphors in the myths, we might kind of uncover what actually occurred in the mysteries? What about this? What if there were lots of vows of secrecy, and the way that people were to explain higher spiritual truths was through the myths? I mean, that's the whole concept for this entire channel, but I was thinking about this because there are things that like factually happen in the mysteries, and it's the barley. It's the barley. The barley is getting to me. I didn't realize it until I read it out loud. Otherwise, I would have looked into it more when I was, writing out everything and researching everything. It didn't click. It's the barley. They were drinking barley teas as part of the preparation, and Psyche used the barley cakes to quiet Cerberus. It's Hercules. It's something that Psyche means soul in Greek. I mean, Psyche, soul. Psyche, my soul. What if? You know what? We're gonna go through this journey of Ancient Awakening, and if at any point I have the light bulb moment where I find a myth that actually does explain, we're gonna go through this journey together. We're gonna go through this journey together, because I wonder if throughout the process of doing this show, if I will unintentionally uncover some hidden metaphor in one of the myths that kind of explains a little bit more of what they did in the mysteries, what they saw. Because what if the myths is a way of them indirectly explaining what they saw? Very interesting. So, I want to conclude, before we go to the affirmations and the journal prompts, to conclude this episode with a closing invocation. So, you have walked the path of Eleusina, you have mourned with Demeter, descended with Persephone, and risen with the grave. You have been reborn. May you and your soul remember what it sees in the silence. May you carry the mystery not in your mind, but in your becoming. So what this means is, if you think of it like this, you walk the path of Eleusina, so you did a pilgrimage to your soul. You mourned the loss with the earth. You descended with the rebirth, to rise again when you bloomed after being planted in the ground. Could Persephone go into the underworld be a metaphor of a seed being planted? And the rebirth, is it blooming in the spring? Remember what you see in the silence of your growth, because that will help you understand your becoming as your highest self in the physical. So, with that being said, let's affirm some things together. So, the affirmations for this week. I honor the descent as part of my awakening. My grief is sacred. It prepares me for transformation. I am not afraid of death. I am ready to be reborn. The mystery lives within me. I am both seed and bloom. I walk the path of Eleusina with courage, reverence, and soul. Now that we've done the affirmations, the journal prompts for this week. Firstly, what part of me is in descent, grieving, lost, or buried? What am I searching for in my spiritual journey? What does rebirth mean to me? And what must I release to rise? Number 4, if I were an initiate at Eleusina, what would I hope to see in the final vision? And number 5, how do I honor the cycles of death and life in my own soul? So we will talk about those next week. But now, what will next week's episode be? Let us pull from the cup. Okay, let's see. What will next week be? We leave it up to the fates, as always, to decide. Oh, something fell. If it's meant to be, I'll pull it again. I think this one is meant to be. Okay. What is this? The importance of free will shown in myth. Okay, I also think this was the one that fell on the ground, and then I put it back and I ended up finding it again. So this is the one that was meant to be. Very interesting theme to consider when we were talking about the Eleusinian Mysteries, because there was a lot of free will in the choice to do those rites, and free will helps you uncover the soul. So how is that shown in mystery? I want to see the ego's free will versus the soul's free will. I will find examples of free will in all senses. Maybe the price of like lack of higher self-guided free will, the price of the desire of the ego taking control. Like I will find the light and the shadow of this. And I will see you for episode 8 for this. Until then, may you continue to seek the mysteries and uncover them from the lessons left for us by the ancient ones. Let's continue to awaken our ancient wisdom together.